We're going to open up with an invocation by Mr. Lupo.
Almighty Creator, please look down upon this gathering and provide your servants with the wisdom to do what is right and just, and to know that each one of us must strive to overcome our faults, as none of us are perfect. Please, Lord, protect this great country and all those who serve her. We ask these things in thy name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Licari, roll call, please.
Mayor Scott Tremblay,
Here.
Vice Mayor William Dittmer,
Here.
Councilwoman Jenny Sorrell,
Here.
Councilman Todd McClary,
Here.
City Attorney James Matthew,
Here.
City Manager Vincent Lupo.
Here.
Thank you. At this time, just note on the agenda, there was a swearing-in ceremony at 7:25. It says 7:25 in the book, so I think that's when she was planning on coming, because that was a notice she received. So what's going to happen is when she gets here, we'll pause the presentation and go back to the swearing-in, and at that point, we'll let the record reflect that she can join us for the budget process. At this point, we're going to start with comments from the general public. I'd like to start with David Mueller.
Dave Mueller, 5439 Blue Point Drive. Thank you, Mayor and council members and administration for allowing me to speak. Just a few comments, and I want to save some for later because I wanted to speak later. One of the things that I noted in this budget package, and I thought it was, well, we got an update today. What I'd like to see is what some of the assumptions were in building this. It's kind of hard to understand what the thought process was, and all the budgets that I've built in my lifetime, we usually start with some kind of assumptions like inflation rate, any capital improvements, and kind of put some flesh on the bones. I mean, this was just numbers on a piece of paper at this point, and I realize it's a work in process, but I'm just thinking from the point of transparency, it would be helpful to people looking through this saying, okay, I'm trying to understand what I'm looking at here, and to the extent that the assumptions follow how the budget was built, I think it would go a long way to building that unity back and forth with the community. And then at the end, I'd put together some kind of a summary that would aggregate it all together so we know where we stand. I was wrestling with a lot of this paperwork, as many of you possibly were, but I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. At this time, that's all that's been signed up for in terms of comments from the general public. Does anyone here wish to speak? Just a show of hands. Showing no hands, at this time I'd like to go to the agenda and see if there's a motion to approve the agenda for the workshop.
Motion to approve the agenda for the workshop.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lupo to begin the presentation.
Certainly. Thank you, Council. What you have before you is a draft document. It's a working draft of our operating budget for fiscal year 2019 to 2020. As you read through that document, there's a section on page 4, and I would just like to briefly make two statements from this presentation. And it is Port Richey's mission is to provide the best service possible to our residents in order to meet or exceed their expectations while continuing to improve the appearance and recognition of our city as an attractive and safe place to live. Commensurate with those sentiments. The proposed draft budget that you have before you will do exactly that. It will move the city in a positive direction that you have and the citizens have requested during previous meetings. And if in fact this draft budget is passed by council, there would be no major increase to the rollback rate of 5.7847. During fiscal year 2018-2019, there were some accomplishments that we would like to point out. There's a continued, and you'll see that for the audience on that chart, continued reduction of bulk water purchase from Newport Ritchie. Purchased a new Public Works utility vehicle, which is operating and has been quite useful by our staff. Upgrades to the water treatment plant. We've upgraded the FlexNet system. We continue to upgrade our city parks. We purchased new police vehicles and equipment, and those new vehicles are currently on the road and being served. We purchased a new CAD system for our police dispatch. Our road repairs on Washington Street are almost complete. US 19 median landscaping is underway. We've implemented the residential grant program, and we continue the annual mangrove trimming. Now, what we projected for fiscal year 2019 through 2020 are the following planned activities. We intend to dredge Channel 1 utilizing Restore Act funds. Nix Park boat ramp repairs will be undertaken. The sidewalk project along River Gulf Road will be undertaken. We continue to upgrade the city parks. We'll continue our annual mangrove trimming. We've continued upgrades to our water production and distribution system, and we continue to do upgrades to our police vehicle fleet. There will be a continuation of the residential grant program, which I'll be coming back to council with for requests to increase and modifications according to their desires and according to our past experience. And we'll purchase a new Public Works Utilities crane truck and dump truck. And those are some of the basic activities that we've planned. Now, that does not include some of the other activities that you will probably choose to undertake during the budget year itself. There are many different activities, possibilities that we'll move forward with. But at this point in time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Andrew Laughlin, who will continue our presentation of the budget summary so we can move on with our process. But you might, Andrew, if I might, Mayor, you might wish to have the swearing in ceremony.
Yes. At this time, I would like to break. We thank you for the opening. Appreciate the overview. One of the things on the agenda that was supposed to happen before we started was swearing in of a fill-in council member. Just to note for the record, the notice that I see that was issued to myself, and I think all the other council people said that the swearing in was supposed to happen at 7:25, and let the record reflect that we started the meeting at 6:30, so the notice was bad. So no fault to Angel Nally in terms of being here at this point. So I wanted to raise that issue first and clarify that there was a notice issue. At this time, I'd like to break and commence with the swearing in of Mrs. Nally.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Nally, if you'd like to come over here, please. And please raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support, protect, and defend
that I will support,
the Constitution and government
the Constitution and government
of the United States
of the United States
and of the state of Florida,
and of the state of Florida,
that I am duly qualified
that I am duly qualified
to hold under office
to hold under office
under the Constitution of the state,
under the Constitution of the state,
and that I will well
and that I will well
and faithfully perform the duties of councilwoman,
and faithfully perform the duties of councilwoman,
on which I am now about to enter,
on
Uh,
which now I am about to enter,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Councilwoman Angel Nowlan. We just,
Thank you, Sal.
Like the new councilperson.
Yes. Congratulations, Angel Nally. And come join us if you would, please. And let the record reflect that Councilwoman Angel Nally is not present for the meeting. At this time, I wanted to turn the meeting and the presentation back over to Mr. Lupo.
Thank you, Mayor. And at this point, we'd like to move forward with the summary, and I'll turn it over to Andrew Laughlin. Mr. Laughlin, please, sir.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lupo. So the budget book you've received, and in fact, you've received 3 versions. The one that you received tonight obviously is the most recent. This is a live and evolving document, so there's been multiple iterations. So just within the last, excuse me, few days, there's been some minor changes since the previous version that was in your agenda packet, simply due to meetings with management, getting feedback from departments, and making necessary changes. So what you have presented here that was physically handed to you is the most recent budget information that you have as of today. And rather going through each page of this budget book, which is rather long, summarize some of the highlights here in this presentation. So I'm just going to go through the presentation slides, focusing on revenues first, and then hitting on expenditures. Oh, do I not have the mic?
Is it on?
Press-
I pushed the button.
Is it on? Just give it a time.
Maybe I need to be closer.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go. Need a little closer.
Sorry, I'll get real close. Should I start over again? No, okay. So first thing we're going to do is just talk about, talk about revenues. We'll hit revenues and then expenses. So first slide that you see here is the summary of revenues by fund. So these balances that you see here were obtained from a variety of means. For taxes and intergovernmental revenues, like taxes like ad valorem, that came from the certification of values by the property appraiser on July 1st, and then estimated based on the rollback rate that was presented to you previously. Intergovernmental revenues, a lot of that comes from the state of Florida, and they actually provide projections around the early to mid-July timeframe. So we've implemented those estimates that coming from the state, like state revenue sharing, local option fuel taxes, those sorts of things. And we've implemented that into these budgeted figures here based on the estimates provided by the state. A lot of other things are just based on historical trends. So what have we seen year over year? For example, utility billing revenue, sale of water, sewer revenues, other things, license permits. What do we, not only historical trends, but what do we anticipate in terms of building activity in the next fiscal period that might dictate what we're going to report as estimated revenues for license permits. So those are all the ways in which we've inputted these budgeted figures here for these variety of revenue sources. One important thing to note here is just the last piece here on fund balance net position carryover. So this is the portion that's would be necessary to balance the budget. So, and that's required to utilize existing available unassigned fund balance and net position, fund balance for general fund, unrestricted net position for stormwater fund in order to balance those budgets. So as of current, budgeted expenditures are exceeding budgeted revenues for fiscal year 2020, and the $367,000 of the general fund and $70,000 of the stormwater funds necessary to pull from existing fund balance net position to balance those budgets. And that's important. I'll discuss more in a future slide on the general fund, and certainly you wanted to note that in the stormwater fund because I've seen a bit of a pattern here. So just for example, the change in net position for stormwater for FY18 was negative 8,900. Change in net position for FY17 was negative 35,000. Change in net position negative fiscal year FY16 was negative 8,000. So decreasing net position before impact fees. We had impact fees of 89,000 in FY17 that brought that to a positive change in net position in 17. But just net income after operations, we have seen deficits in the stormwater fund. So just want to make sure you're aware of that, and we're budgeting the same here as well. We just don't have the sufficient revenues to cover projected expenses in stormwater, and that's why we're having to pull out more net position for that $70,000. And again, if you have any questions, please stop me at any time. So just revenue trend analysis, just showing you this so you can know, hey, is there any projections in here that are just completely different than what we've seen in years past? And so the straight line means no, not really, pretty consistent from year over year. There is one line that's doing a little bit of a dance, and that's in the intergovernmental revenue piece down at the bottom. So the 2019 budget had a real big increase from previous actual, then 2019 actual year to date, much less, and now we're going back up in budgeting for FY20. A lot of this has to do with the Restore Act proceeds. So we budgeted $367,000 for Restore Act proceeds for dredging activities. That comes from the Deepwater Horizon spill. That's what initiated the Restore Act. So the city has access to those funds. The planned project in FY19 for $367,000, that hasn't taken off. So there, as Mr. Lupo mentioned, in FY20, we do have plans to spend those Restore Act proceeds. So now we're budgeting $667,000 in FY20. So that's why you see that big spike again in the blue line there for intergovernmental revenues. Everything else, pretty much for the most part, is pretty consistent. So then the next one is in the CRA fund. In CRA, this isn't entirely dominated by the TIF revenues, which are based on property values. So as property values increase, TIF revenues increase as well. We also have a tiny bit of an increase as well because we're going to allocate some investment income to the CRA fund. If you recall my investment presentation at the last council meeting I attended, we do anticipate more investment income dollars that will be coming in FY20 that will be dispersed in an allocable manner amongst the funds. The next is the capital improvement fund revenue trend. So these are your penny for Pasco dollars that come in. So this is based on underlying transactions within your district. It's been pretty consistent year over year. We've seen a little bit of increasing, so we're kind of budgeting the same way for FY20, just looking at those past trends. And that's really the best way we're able to budget penny for Pasco is seeing what the trend has been over multi-years. The next in the water and sewer utility fund, again, this is mostly based on trend analysis as well. We have a little spike here in the bottom, that's miscellaneous revenues. Those would be things coming over in impact fees mostly. So if you have water and sewer impact fees, we had a lot of license and permit and impact fee activity in FY17. So that's why you see the spike there, less so in 16 and 18 actual. And when I talk about 16, 17, 18 actual, this is from the actual CAFR document, the audited financial statements of the city is where I'm pulling that information from. The 2019 budget, I'm obviously pulling from the adopted budget from 2019. 2019 actual annualized, this is based on all the revenue and expense activity recorded to the general ledger for the city, and then annualized, so divided by 9 multiplied by 12 to annualize those figures. So that's causing the spike in 2017, and then for the actual charges for services, so that's your ready to serve, your water, your sewer, your irrigation, et cetera. Trying to make those consistent. We do have a little bit of a dip in 2019 actual. A lot of that's just due to timing, as well as we had some general ledger posting issues from December that we're still sorting out. But overall, we're making the 2019 or 2020 budget based on trending information from 16, 17, 18 actual plus 19. And then the exact same thing in stormwater. So the miscellaneous revenue decreased there from 2019 actual to 2020 proposed budget. I think we only have 5,000 for stormwater impact fees budgeted thus far. I think for 2020 and 2019, I believe we had 30,000 or so in actual stormwater revenues, but that's the decline there. And the stormwater fee, the rate that we're charging for stormwater hasn't changed since 2015. So the rates for water and sewer utility as well as stormwater have been consistent year over year. So this is the concern I relayed to you all in a few slides previous, just about utilizing available unassigned fund balance in order to balance your general fund. And if this happens every now and then just based on operating activities planned in a certain budgeted year, that's understandable. But if it becomes a consistent trend, it does get a little more alarming. So I just wanted to pose that to you all and depict that graphically here. So what we're seeing in the FY20 budget, again, that was that $300 and some odd thousand that we're going to infuse in available assigned fund balance. So far in the FY19 year to date, we're running just about even, but again, the year's not done yet, and a lot of our ad valorem revenue, we've already received the vast majority of that, so we could have expenditures still running out, but not get those bigger tax ad valorem dollars, since those are more heavily weighted towards the first half of the year. So I do have even some concerns there. And then just looking at FY18 actual, FY16 actual, FY15 actual, FY14 actual, those all had decrease in fund balance in the CAFR for those previous years. Now 17 actual, we did have an overall positive results, and a lot of that, as I mentioned previously, was due to increase in license and permits revenues and impact fees that the city received for the building activities that occurred in that fiscal year. But that seems more like an anomaly rather than the true trend in past history has been continued deficit. So I just want to point that out to you all. I think it's important to note. So summary of expenses by fund. Let me just stop there on revenues. And are there any questions or anything anyone wants to discuss further on the revenue piece? Okay, I'll move into expenses. Again,
Well,
so
wait,
how do we?
I do have a quick question.
Oh, sorry. Sure.
No, it's okay. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I do notice in the 2020 proposed budget, our building permit estimate, it's greatly increased. And I just don't know where all that extra is coming from. I mean, we're going from 175,000 to 350. Oh, sorry, page 15.
Sure. You want to address that now?
Yeah.
So one was a university that's coming. I don't know if anyone wants to give more details behind that, but we do have some planned big
So
building
that is the big
activity.
item that's gonna,
Yep.
okay,
Yeah, Kaiser University.
Kaiser.
Kaiser
Okay.
University, yep.
All right. I wasn't sure if that was a set.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Good to move into expenses? Okay. So for expenses, how do we derive these figures? A multitude of factors. A lot being what his history told us in terms of actuals from previous fiscal years. Also mindful of what was the FY19 budget. And then just a lot of input from the departments, from department directors, and talking about what upcoming needs are. So throughout the last couple months, we've had multiple meetings with essentially all the departments that have provided their input. We've had budget worksheets that have been passed around to the departments so they can evaluate for themselves and provide feedback to me. And then entering this repository in our consolidated budget worksheet for the expenses by fund and by department. So it's been a lot of collaboration over the last couple months in order to derive these figures. So there's some things to note. I have some specific slides to go through, personnel, operating, and capital, so I'll hold comments till we get to those slides. A couple things on just debt service and inter-fund. So debt service, those are the revenue bonds, Series 2016. So the 2016 revenue bonds refunded the 2005 Series C, which was general fund, governmental activities, and then the 2005 Series D, which was water and sewer utility fund. So the general fund and the water and sewer utility fund are kind of splitting the deck on the principal and interest payments on those outstanding revenue 2016 series bonds. The other pieces in the capital improvement, that's the penny for Pasco, that's $31,779. That relates to the lease, existing lease of a fire truck. Those principal and interest payments are $31,779, and those will run out in fiscal year 21. So we'll have lease payments totaling annually the $31,000 in FY20 and another one in 21, and then own the vehicle outright. I believe after that, no more lease payments. So those are the amounts relating to debt service. No plans to issue new debt, at least that have not been discussed and put in this budget for the upcoming fiscal year.
Andrew, if I might, I'd just like to remind council and the general public that sometime back in September of 16, there was an effort at consolidation and of our bonds. Andrew just began to refer to that. But that operation netted us, the city, an economic gain of $318,598 through the reduction of future interest costs. So that goes in with what Mr. Laughlin has been saying, and that we have a handle on what our bond obligations are carried out through the future. We're moving in a direct path of fiscal responsibility. Thank you, Andrew.
Yep, good point. The last piece on interfund, that $585,836 is just a transfer. It occurs every year between the general fund and the CRA fund. So that TIF portion, that's the TIF, that city portion, comes in as ad valorem tax revenue to the general fund and then transfers out to the CRA fund. I think in FY19 it was $503,000. This year, $585,000. Again, that's rising property values, and that's all provided to us by the property appraiser that allowed us to calculate what that TIF revenue would be that would be transferred. So that's what that relates to. The other interfund is an interfund indirect cost allocation. I've got a future slide that'll provide more calculation details on how that was derived for community redevelopment, water and sewer, and stormwater. So let's dig into personnel costs first. So overall, we do see that costs are rising in general fund and water and sewer utility fund. A few factors at play. As far as new positions, not a whole lot of activity there. There's 3 unfilled positions that the city intends to fill in FY20. One is a Public Works and Utilities Director that's currently in need of. And then we have a police service technician for the police, and then a firefighter EMT inspector for fire. So those are only 3 positions that are not currently filled by an able body currently, that will intend on, and we're budgeting for those costs in FY20. So those 3 positions. The other piece that's causing probably the greatest rise in personnel costs is really in health insurance costs. So unfortunately, and I've had multiple discussions with the city's insurance broker, and we are exploring a number of options. So what I'm going to tell you now isn't necessarily going to be factual, hopefully not in the next month or two, but initial projections of up to 45% increase in health insurance costs for city employees. So looking at a variety of different options, there's different plans that the city could potentially enter into. There's a level funded premium plan where there's some potential shared savings based on actual medical loss rate or claims that are incurred throughout the year. So I'm exploring that with the broker. There's other ways that you can potentially drive costs down, like have higher deductible plans to offer to employees. So there's different things that can be done, but for right now, based on the information I've been given with the 45% in health insurance costs, I've baked that into the personnel costs for each employee. And there's also some increase, some room for salary increases as well for each employee from 2019 rates to budget 2020. So a little budget for salary increases as well per employee. This just shows you the personnel costs by department, so which departments are absorbing the greatest amount of salaries and wages and benefits. Police being the most by far, followed by then fire, and then water treatment, distribution, stormwater. I put those departments together collectively are rounding it out third. And so this just kind of showed you the distribution amongst departments. And it also includes, the prior year's history as well. Then this next slide also shows you how is this allocated by fund. So, for example, police is entirely red in this bar graph, so it's entirely funded by the general fund. Others, like Public Works, have a more even distribution, and then others like water treatment, distribution, stormwater, obviously that's all enterprise, mostly in the water and sewer utility fund, and then a little on stormwater as well. Utility billing, all entirely water and sewer utility. And then other areas like you all, city council, mostly general fund with a little CRA fund. So this just kind of depicts the split among funds for each department for personnel costs.
Andrew, if I might interject one other thing.
Sure.
If you take a look at that chart, you'll see where the community redevelopment funds. We continually make an effort to reduce our dependency on CRA funds with respect to employees. And we will continue that again until we have an extremely low amount, an amount which is absolutely justifiable and in keeping with the needs. But I just wanted to point out the continuing effort to reduce dependency on CRA for employees.
Yep.
Andrew?
Yep, 2018 is actual is a little higher than what we're budgeting for FY20 budget, so good point there. Oh, question, yes.
Or not, there we go. So I just want to make sure I understand what you were saying, that there was also figured into the budget increases salaries. Is that based on trying to compensate for the insurance rates going up for the employees too, so they'll be able to, it won't affect them as badly? I mean,
Mr.
'cause
Luba,
it's-
did you want to
No,
discuss the salary increase?
During the last fiscal year, there was no raises at all granted to the employees.
Mhm.
This takes in consideration the cost of living over both last year, or this fiscal year, and the coming fiscal year. And that was the small increase, and we figured it to be approximately 5%, 2.5% for each of the 2 years. And that's the increase. The additional amount that Mr. Laughlin is referring to is the potential additional cost related to the cost of insurance.
Right.
Because of the experience factor, we're still trying to obtain the best possible rate, but we have to consider what a super conservative rate is, and it's included in these numbers.
So next is the analysis of operating costs. Just based on this figure here, a relatively consistent fund by fund. Not a whole lot of, obviously the capital improvement fund, which is for Penny for Pasco, that's typically designed for capital related items. You might have some small operating costs in there for maybe purchases of maybe small equipment that doesn't meet the capitalization threshold, but generally next to none on capital improvement. And then, so stormwater also very little, and then water and sewer, we were showing actually a decline in budgeted operating costs. General fund and community redevelopment fund, we are seeing a little bit of an uptick from what was experienced in the FY18 actual, and also what we budgeted in FY19. Some of that is due to the interfund allocation, so I'll explain that on the next slide. So the interfund cost allocation, we revamped this process and took a little harder look at it. In previous years, there was just an amount that was charged. It was to the tune of $300-something thousand that the general fund charged other funds, but it was the same amount every year. So I wanted to try to to better refine how we're to derive that amount, and so we put together this cost allocation formula, looking at those departments: city council, administration, finance, IT, general government, dispatch, public works, that serve a broader purpose than just strictly the general fund. And so those general operating activities, for example, a big one in general government is property liability insurance, right? So those costs can get spread out. Those costs are entirely budgeted just in the general fund when they're incurred, but then they're going to be spread out amongst the funds based on this cost allocation methodology. So what we do is we're assigning percentages to these other funds that absorb it, like CRA, utility, and stormwater. Note that I didn't include capital improvements since it's just capital in nature, but CRA, utility, and stormwater are going to be allocated some of those departmental operating costs, and that's how that's done, based on those assigned percentages that you see at the top. So that's for the city council, admin, finance, IT, general government, dispatch, and public works, and then another allocation at the bottom for police and fire with a different percentage allocation among CRA, utility, and stormwater. So that's how that's derived. And then if you look at the next slide, mentioned some of the reasons mentioned that general fund and community redevelopment fund had some increase in their operating costs compared to prior year budget and 2018 actual. In the general fund, this is $1,072,000 in the 20 budget compared to only $792,000 in the 19 budget, and this is relating to grants. So this was that $667,000 of that dredging project that I mentioned, was $300-something thousand before. So with the grant department, these are really revenues in and expenditures out, so it's a zero net effect. But obviously, it causes that bar graph to show higher than previous years. So I want to just show you is that's the big reason for that in the general fund. It's $1 million based on that planned grant activity. And then the CRA fund, the Community Redevelopment Fund, $295,000 of indirect cost allocation, and that's in the FY 2020 budget, a little higher than in the FY 19 budget, and that's the calculation I showed you how we derive that figure. Then the last couple slides for me, and then we'll open it up to discussion, is just the analysis of capital costs. So this is just a pie chart to show what we're spending in for each of the funds. The lion's share is the $375,000 in community redevelopment. That's 300,000 of which is for potential dredging. So I got some specifics on the next couple slides as to what those amounts really consist of. So for the general fund, we had 62,500 of equipment for dispatch. That's for radio equipment replacement, and that'll be funded out of Fund 120. That's the police confiscation fund, and that's a restricted revenue source that can only be used for police operating capital needs. The community development fund, I mentioned the 300,000 for dredging. We also have 55,000 for road improvements and 20,000 for sidewalk and construction. Then that capital improvement fund, several things here, 105,000 for purchase or lease of police vehicles. Mr. Lupo mentioned this in the beginning of his presentation. So that's the potential purchase of 35,000 each for 3 cars, but we're also evaluating potential lease options in lieu of purchasing. But we are putting money in the budget for funding of police vehicles for FY20, purchase, lease, or otherwise. 12,000 for purchase of body armor, 67,006 for purchase of fire equipment, and $80,000 for the purchase of equipment and vehicle and public works. And that 80,000 is 30,000 of that is for paving equipment, and 50,000 is for a new dump truck. So those 2 items is what makes up the public works 80,000 budget for capital.
Andrew, if I might, before you go forward, with respect to the police vehicles, as I stated earlier today, the 2 vehicles that were purchased previously are operating. They are fully operational. They've already are affecting our positively our ability to police our community. With respect to this coming fiscal year, we intend to move forward in the most efficient, cost-effective manner to finally relieve ourselves of the burden of the Dodges that we currently have and the expenses involved in keeping them. And we'll move forward with either the purchase of some vehicles or the leasing of some vehicles, the most cost-effective way to get more vehicles back on the road. We'll be coming to council with options, and we'll try and obtain council's direction based on the costs. But I talk about that because the next year, I would like to be able to come to council and with that following year's budget and move forward in the fire department to begin to consider the acquisition of a new fire vehicle. But that's something in the following year's budget. But I bring it up now so that council and the general public understands that we are in no ways avoiding that issue. We know it's there. We're trying to address it, and we're trying to work it in the most efficient manner possible.
And I had a question on the fire truck note. The older truck that we have is approximately 12 years old, is that correct?
Our current reserve apparatus is 1999. It's about 20 years old.
Okay. And that vehicle, is the city still making payments on that vehicle?
No, that's owned outright. That was purchased in 99 outright.
Okay. The question that I wanted to pose is if we were to order a new fire truck or vehicle for the fire department, it's my understanding that sometimes those vehicles, if we order them, depending on how it may happen, not only will take over a year to actually build and be delivered, but those payments or the cost associated with that vehicle wouldn't hit the city until next year's budget anyways. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's correct in a way. How they do it is come October, we would spec a fire apparatus, and we would start the purchase and the process of purchasing an apparatus. The fire truck takes about a year to build to specifications. The fire truck doesn't actually come due until the truck's delivered. So that's how they make that payment, like theory, extend out a year. So if you decided to purchase it in December, the payment wouldn't come due until that following December, pending the delivery of the fire apparatus.
Mayor, this might assist you. I've already tasked the fire department to begin the study of what kind of equipment we would need, what kind of engine we would need, and the associated costs with respect to that, so that we begin to get a handle on it sometime during this year, and then work towards the funding of it in the following budget year. But we could move forward based on the information that the fire department presents us. And we'll be coming back to council some future date with that information and begin that discussion.
And along with the police vehicles, or one of the things that the city's exploring are the cost of outright purchasing a vehicle versus
Please.
leasing a vehicle for the police department, or for the fire department as well.
Sure.
So we'll have
That's-
both options.
Yeah, yes, it'll be.
Yeah, we would more than likely lease a fire truck, just because the average cost of fire truck's gone up. So we're looking at about a $450,000 cost for a fire truck. And that's being a modest, basic fire truck. It's not getting any bells or whistles, no pun intended, on that.
Thank you. If I can turn it back over to
Andrew?
Sure. So just last slide on capital costs. Water and sewer utility fund. So there's $125,000 for water treatment plant improvements and small equipment purchases, $65,000 for a crane truck, $50,000 for a SCADA well water control system. That $125,000 for the improvements, $100,000 of that is earmarked for the green sand filter refurbishing
Correct.
project. That'll be potentially starting in 19 but continuing in 20. And then $25,000 for smaller equipment purchases, so that's what comprises that $125,000. The SCADA well water control system, there's already been some costs incurred to get the wells in line with SCADA, and there's just a number that's left that's projected for 20 that will spend those dollars. So that's pretty accurate, that 50,000 there, because that's a specific project. Then the stormwater fund, the 46,000, we've got mangrove trimming and other stormwater improvements. It's really 30,000 that we're estimating for mangrove trimming, and then 16,000 for drainage cleaning. And then those might be moved to operating if those probably more construed operating in nature, repair and maintenance. So that might get moved in a subsequent budget version to operating, but nevertheless, that's what stormwater plans to spend on those two items, the 46,000. And then maybe just the last point I'll make on capital costs, as far as what room there is in the budget. There is a big line item in your FY18 CAFR for $571,000 for capital projects relating to transportation. So these are transportation impact fees that are unspent as of 9/30/18 for $571,000. So we haven't designed any specific plans to tap into those available funds from previous revenue collections as of yet. So most of that, the capital expenditures I'm referring to are coming really out of the capital improvement fund.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. At some previous point in time, we've had a traffic analysis completed and traffic flows. And we had discussed with council the potential extension of Ritchie Drive. And if we were to move forward with that project, the initial funds would come from that amount, from those funds, transportation impact funds. But we'll be coming back to council for that discussion if council decides to move in that direction, after we make a presentation to council about the potential benefits of the extension of Ritchie Drive, which would also include alterations to the storm water drainage system and the flow of traffic with respect to the upcoming development in the Lenore Homes. But that will be something we're coming back to council. We just simply point out that those funds would be available for that project.
Do those funds show as a rollover from previously into the new budget, or I
No.
didn't see those funds show up in the budget.
In the budget book, I think there was a breakout of 55,000 from restricted, and then the vast majority
So unrestricted funds?
of that shortfall was,
Okay.
yeah, unrestricted.
Right, so then on the Ritchie Drive extension, I think we may have looked at, but we do have those two also city-owned streets.
Correct.
go through.
There would be
Would that
part
be
and parcel.
considered one? Okay.
That's part and parcel of the project.
Okay, great, thank you.
The other question that I had, going back to the summary of expenses by fund, one of the things that I was trying to get a grasp of is some of these are debts or bonds that are owed. I know that there's other expenses that we have every year, such as, I'm sure, the payment on this building. One of the things I didn't see was a graph to show when some of these debts would expire in terms of when they would be paid off. And I was trying to get an idea of when some of these would be paid off for future budgeting purposes, if we have a graph or any information on that.
Sure, I've got the 2018 CAFR in front of me. So like I mentioned, the capital lease terminates in fiscal year 2021, and then the Series 2016 bond for governmental activities, the last payment would be in 2020. So that's the 139,050 would end in fiscal year 20, this upcoming fiscal year 2020. Then for the water and sewer utility, that would end in fiscal year 2023.
Which one was ending in 2021?
The capital improvement fund fire truck lease ends in 2021. The revenue bond series 2016 governmental activities portion paid out of general fund ends in 2020.
Okay.
Revenue bonds 2016 water and sewer portion ends in 2023.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I just wanted to get the dates, because I didn't see the dates when they were ending in the graphs. Gotcha. Thank you.
I'll go back and try and put it as simply as I can for the general public. If we were to follow this draft budget before any changes are made, it would concur with your last motion, and we would be utilizing the rollback rate of 5.7847, which essentially would have no real millage increase, general millage increase to the general public. Any questions we have of council?
I wanted to open for discussion, council first. And I'd start with Mr. Dittmer, if that's okay.
Well, and you want to discuss the overall budget, or just the things we were just now discussing? Because I have several things I thought we were going to walk through them a little bit. So that's, I don't know how you want to proceed with that.
We should just take one item at a time, as you guys have concerns, and we'll address them.
By each time, then we should probably move forward, and as we go to each one, all take a turn on what our questions are.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, my first question we already answered, which was on page 15, was the increase to the revenue was from the new Kaiser College coming online. So that answered my first question on that. I didn't have any other questions really on that particular general fund revenue budget, as anybody else does. And if I'm off on pages, excuse me, because I'm using the one I marked up.
I think you're right on 16.
Yeah.
Yep, 16.
Okay, it's 16 on the new one, 15 on the one we marked up. So that was the only question I had, but it was answered, so thank you.
And I guess we'll start down that way. Mr. Eldridge, do you have anything to add?
I'm good, thank you.
Mr. McCleary?
Give me a minute, because unfortunately my computer crashed out on me, so all of my nice new notes in here are now trying to be remembered
Okay.
as I was going through, so if we could just
Howie?
I guess I would just like to have more clarification about the negative trend. That seems to be the only concern that you were talking about. So if you could just review that for me, just clarify that.
You want me to address that, or?
Sure.
So your question is just on, I mean, the results are pretty black and white. Revenues, expenditures exceeding revenues in the general fund over the last several years, minus 1 year in FY17, based on an influx of building activity that generated more permit and impact fee revenue. So that's just the concern I raised, that if that trend continues for a number of years, if you, in FY18, the FY18 CAFR, there was 1,201,812 unassigned fund balance that can be used for, in the general fund, that can be used for any purpose, not restricted for any matters. So if that keeps whittling down, you know, we're clicking off 300,000 in our budget each year, then, you know, there's concerns over time. So just something that certainly in the FY20 budget it can absorb, but not a trend we want to continue year after year.
You know, if I might,
Yeah.
over the past years, long-term years, the trend of the community has been to continually suppress the millage rates and to not increase millage rates. And as everyone knows, in order to undertake certain activities, you need a certain amount of revenue. And in order to meet the demands, those funds must be raised. They have to come from somewhere. In the past, what has occurred is a balancing act between CRA funds, general funds, and other income sources. And the final outcome has been an attempt to have the millage rate remain at a stagnant level. It is the administration's intention in the next, not this coming budget, but the following budget, to begin to bring proposals to City Council with respect to increases in the millage rate for very specific reasons, including set-asides for future projects. But that is a discussion for council at a future budget, unless council decides it wants to increase taxes and go beyond the proposed 5.7 and change millage rate. That would alter the trend that Mr. Laughlin is speaking to. But at this point in time, we have prepared for you a balanced budget with the 5.7 and change rate. And that addresses the issues that you're speaking to.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, when you go to the analysis of the personnel costs and you go back, is there any way to, because I know that in terms of stormwater, I think we charge lower than everybody in the area. Is there any way to increase that a little bit, which will help with the personnel costs, and then that'll give us a little bit more general funds to do some of the things that we need to do?
Several meetings ago, I spoke to council about taking a look, and we are in the process of doing that, of our entire fee structure, our rate structure and fee structure, in our building department, our stormwater rates, other potential fee structures and rate structures that would address the issues you're talking about, that you're concerned about. And that's exactly what we're doing. Over the past years, past 3 years, because of our ability to improve our water acquisition and distribution system, we have not increased water rates to our community. Council chose not to increase the, I believe it was 4%, 5% per year. That was projected for 5 years. We haven't done that. So those rates have remained one of the lowest in the state. That's something we'll take a look at, and when we get the positive numbers, that you need to make a decision. We'll come back to council with our recommendations and those numbers so you can consider those issues. And if you move in a direction that makes most sense for us, it'll affect the questions that you and some of the other council people have raised and Councilwoman Ellie has raised.
And one of the reasons I brought that up is because as a community, as we try and decrease using the CRA monies for the personnel costs, that has to be replaced somewhere, and I think that the stormwater and some of these other funds may be the best way to reduce those costs without taking from the general funds.
It depends entirely on how it's phrased and what they're utilized, because there are certain restrictions with respect to the ability to use those funds. So that's part of the guidelines that I'm talking about, coming back to council with our recommendations as to the actual cost and fees associated with it. Once we do that, then we can address some of those issues. What we have done now is we have done to the best within that framework of reducing our CRA dependency. We've come way down from 63% to under 25%.
And that restructure is gonna affect the budget. What is that?
I would believe we would be able to get some of the rate studies done in this coming budget for the following budget.
For the next budget year?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, same thing on the CRA. I know for a lot of people in the general public, we've heard from them a lot about using CRA funds, especially for salaries and things. I did notice that our council salaries, though it's only $6,000 something, maybe we can look at just see if we can maneuver some more money just to slowly take those things off the shelf, because that is the smallest chunk to take. So I don't know if that is something that we can work towards, or if we have funds somewhere else to compensate for that.
Sure, we can do that. That's simple. Yes, sir.
I think little by little,
All right.
like I know you're currently doing it, but it shows a step.
And then I wanted to go back to Mr. McCleary, if I may.
Yeah, if we're still on revenues at this point, I have a couple questions on the assumptions that we made. For one, for the ad valorem delinquent taxes, we're assuming that we're gonna recover $51,000 in 2020 budget. That would be about 2.5 times last year's budget and 5 times the previous budget. What gives us such confidence in such a high recovery rate that we haven't seen previously? And the reason I'm asking is it's almost $50,000, which is a sizable chunk of money in this current budget.
I mean, it's of little consequence. It's because it's that amount combined, the 1.6 million and the 51,000 is what was calculated based on what the property appraiser sent. And then we're just estimating, okay, who's gonna pay their property taxes late. So either way, we anticipate the money coming in. I think we budget based on 95% of property values.
Of
It's just a-
recovery?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's just a matter of at what time are they going to
Pay
be
their
paying the
tax.
property tax bills.
Right.
The
Okay,
city
so
just-
it's not a back tax assumption, it's just a delinquent off of the current fiscal year?
Correct.
Okay.
So the city receives the money from the tax collector. The tax collector does break out in the distribution, here are your current, and here is your delinquent. And then we, the city and finance, just charge it to 2 separate
So
general ledger accounts.
So you're just assuming a 1.7 million and
Exactly.
a 95 or 98% delinquent
Exactly.
rate, but recovery within the same year?
Yes.
So it's no additional funds from prior years is what or carry forward from
Right.
previous years, okay. For the Restore Act, I know that's paid when paid, or we have to pay out the funds, and we're assuming that we're paying out the funds now. We have utmost confidence that we will be receiving $667,000, because that will crush this budget.
We do know that we have followed every law, every procedure. We have moved it up the chain of command, through the county, through the federal government. As long as the work that is completed has been authorized and is approved, we will be funded. That money does exist.
Okay.
But that's something we'll know beforehand, correct? No, they'll tell us beforehand that they're
Well,
gonna approve it.
well, it's two questions. One is a recovery, and two is a timing thing.
If we knew ahead of time, we wouldn't be having the question.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I can help you with the answer a little bit.
There you go.
You're looking for how sure are we, and Dr. Martinez and I discuss this all the time. Two things, okay? The project will take some time, okay? And as we do the project, we'll be paid in the course of time. So if we have a problem with the first third of it, they don't give us the money, we may stop the rest, okay, if there's a problem. And it's a great question. And number two is you'll see contingencies in the CRA fund of about $300,000 to back up the emergency. That was the thinking, Councilman McClary.
I guess what I was saying is there'll be communication as the project unfolds.
Absolutely.
On an hourly basis.
Yes, sir.
We've discussed this with them to the point where we send an email at 9 o'clock, and at 9:10 in the morning, we're looking for the response, because they know we're budgeting for this and concerned about what Councilman McClary said.
Okay.
How many times have we talked about this? Almost on a daily basis.
One other, again, we're assuming several progressions of liquor licenses, that sort of thing. Is just a normal adjustment of revenue fees like we were talking about earlier, or is there are other projects forthcoming that we don't know about per se that we're assuming within? Again, it's small amounts. I'm just trying to get a good grasp on your assumptions as you go into this.
Liquor license was one where we just evaluated based on historical trend. So no other additional information that we had in order to derive that budget figure.
That's all I have on revenues.
The other item I did notice that was already brought up once, but there's a huge spike in the healthcare. You can see it reflected on page 27. 2019 budget is 7,400, budget 2020, 22,000. And that's a theme going through every single one. So I know Ms. Martinez said that we were looking at trying to find another source for that, because even personally, if you took a 45% increase in your personal health insurance, it would be devastating. And it reflects hard on the budget.
Yes, sir. But because it is a budget, we had to take the most conservative number,
I understand that.
and that's the number we're using. Obviously, we're arguing tooth and nail to get out there and try and get the lowest possible rate. But those involved in the insurance industry know that it's an actuarial table. It's a table based on experience and ratings and the size of the pools that we're involved in. And we will continue to attempt to get the lowest possible rate. And I assure you, if we are successful, we will come to council very quickly to notify council. But as I said, what we are projecting must be and is a conservative number.
Unfortunately, large individual historical claims has been the biggest culprit.
Yeah, I know when they came in, we had a discussion on why we're taking such a big hit this year.
And so, again, we're exploring every possible option. I've even talked with the broker about what if we decide to go self-insured, and what does the reinsurance rates look like for aggregate and individual. So everything is on the table to try to keep that number in check.
Is there any feasibility, and this may or may not be a good question to ask, with partnering with one of the adjacent cities to pool the funds? For instance, Newport Richey, combining policies with Newport Richey.
I believe
if
we
that's-
are in a pool already.
We are.
So, you're
Yeah.
already in the pool?
Jocelyn, you can
I-
speak to that. Our current operation is within a pool.
Not for health.
I'm sorry?
Not for health insurance. My goal would be to get us in a pool,
Right.
if we would be accepted.
I'm assuming Newport Richey would probably be negotiating on or about the same time we are for those. Is that something that is a feasible alternative? And I'm asking as much as,
We can certainly look into it.
We can acquire to other taxing jurisdictions. Again, Newport Richey, again, right now, the city of Port Richey is not a favorable client to work for health insurance carriers, based on, like I said, historical claim data.
well, that, and we're a relatively small pool of insurees as well.
But we will take a look and we'll try and get involved and if we possibly can.
Sure, and like I said, everything is on the table.
We couldn't do it. If it could help you, I said in the insurance committee when it comes up, we got a new broker last year who was, and council picks a new broker. We had long, lengthy conversations on just that. As Andrew said, we're small and our history is bad, so no one wants to hook up with us at this point in time. There's some legal issues about hooking up, just smaller, but you can somewhat do it on a larger basis, but we'll be sitting down with them. It's one of the reasons Andrew had to change the budget. We just got the potential insurance stuff a couple of days ago because we've been asking for it, but no, we're looking at those options. I think we were thinking of subbing out to people too. That's where some people are going. It's very complex. We may be too small for that. Put all our employees on it. There's a name for doing that, you know.
You make them contractors.
Yeah, I forget what the name is. You sub it out. Florida allows that, and so they're looking at it. Yeah. So we'll get back to you. We'll ask them. Yeah, we'll probably look at it more this year, Scott.
The Newport Richey's not gonna wanna pair up with us, because we're gonna drive their rates up.
Oh,
Yes.
But even if we have to cover the overage between the two,
overall savings will be there.
it's an insuree pool size. So if you have a very big, large pool of good guys and us, then the rates wouldn't be as drastic for
There's
Newport
insurance
Richey.
issues about just two different governments hooking up. They generally won't do that. It's
Yeah.
gotta be some sort of like the Florida League of Cities. They're not gonna let us just be like two companies hooking up.
Mm.
If we're gonna keep moving through the budget, I had another question then in page 29 in finance. I'm assuming the wages and salaries drop because we don't have a finance director in position right now. But then I see the big jump in professional services, and that's the outside vendor that we're using to replace. Do we have a handle on, I mean, that's a $50,000 discrepancy, I think, between what we, our reduction from 97,000 to 48, but then our increase to 96,000 on outside services. So are we currently looking for a full-time?
Yes, we are.
Because I think the outside, it seems to be quite expensive, so.
We've had several applicants and we're looking at them right now.
Great.
One of the things I wanted to ask Mr. Lupo, kind of two questions. We have those impact fees that were paid, which is a relatively large amount of money that's just been sitting there that we talked about for the Ritchie Road expansion. Are there any other projects that you foresee in the near future where we could utilize that money other than the Ritchie Road extension?
Not at this time, and that's why, essentially why they sat there. The ability to use those funds is extremely limited, and primarily only for the construction of a new road. And that's one of the primary limits on the utilization of those funds. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
so we have, At this stage, we're just coming forward with a potential project that we had suggested almost a year ago.
And the second part of that question is, if that amount of money to do that extension exceeds the 500 and I think it was 71,000, where would that money come from in terms of this budget or our budget?
It comes from additional impact. That's the only place where those funds come from, other than we would then task the general fund as an activity if council chooses to go beyond that. And that's why one of the first things that we would do with respect to that project or any similar project is to get a cost analysis and try and get some handle on what those costs may actually be, and then come before council before we would move forward on a project like that. The project can cost well in excess of $1 million, may cost well in excess of $1 million. We won't know until we march down that road. Currently, all we have at this stage of the game with respect to that project is, I believe, just a survey at this point in time. So we would have to do some additional engineering, if council chooses to go in that direction, which is a future discussion before council.
And that would depend on sidewalks, lighting, drainage, and everything else that goes with it. You have
Correct.
engineering studies for
The
all that.
overall design and development of that
Correct.
street, yes, sir.
And then you just rely on whatever the engineers say that the best way to proceed is.
That would give us the ideas, and the council can make a decision whether to move forward and how we would fund it. Obviously, the primary funds would be from there, and then the project obviously would not be able to be completed in the next fiscal year.
Correct.
So we could make arrangements in the following budget to address those issues.
Correct, okay, thank you. Mr. McClary?
The improvements that you mentioned from the road fund, I'll call it, that could be also sidewalks and improvements in the waterfront overlay district, or
I'm sorry.
or are we stuck strictly with new road construction? Or it could be improvements of existing roads is another potential?
Let me,
Jim?
First, transportation impact fees have to be spent within a certain amount of years. They could be subject to the claims of those that paid them. I believe it's 5 or 7, I can't remember. The answer to your question, Councilman, is that you can use them for new road construction. So there may be some issues concerning those 2 roads there getting into, Councilman Dittmer had mentioned those 2 other roads.
Yes.
I don't know if that would be new roads or not, but any construction which takes vehicles or traffic off the street is considered new road construction now. There's been some cases. So yes, it would be sidewalks, regardless of where the sidewalks are. Does that answer your question?
Mhm.
And for future planning, if the Kaiser project goes forward, we will have impact fees that can be utilized in the waterfront overlay district from those. But just looking at it logically, I was trying to figure out if Lennar Homes paid impact fees, that we should spend those impact fees.
You're not required.
We're not required to, but certainly I think that's why they were there, earmarked for those residents buying the homes to
It's entirely a decision to council.
Yeah, it's an assessment, I'll call it an assessment that is made by the town that, in general, you're making traffic impact to the overall city, as the case may be. We could spend it wherever we wish.
Correct, but there's no other place in our city that needs a new road, so we're kind of, that I know of. So I think that's the only
And
place that you can put
that's
that.
why there was a lot of
Right.
case law to include sidewalks and other improvements to improve traffic flow throughout the city, because there's a lot of cities that didn't have any places to put new roads, but still wanted funding,
Okay.
fund sources, I should say.
You fine?
And then also a lot of assumptions here, but on, let's see, page 36 under the police department, probably just a real quick answer. I see under vehicle expenses, it dropped way down. I'm assuming that's because we're just taking the old Dodges offline and we have new vehicles coming in, Captain?
Which line on that page, sir?
It's item object 465, vehicle expense.
What page are you?
I'm sorry.
Page 36, towards the bottom, 465.
Right here.
In the new one?
In the new one, I know.
I believe that line was related to,
Yeah, that's not purchases.
Right, it's expenses on the, I
Oh,
thought, it's because the new cars will have less expenses, is that
yes, sir.
why it
Yes.
dropped
Yes, sir.
dramatically?
Once
Okay.
new cars come in, obviously, they're gonna be maintained, and if the planning is to have a maintenance contract on it.
Yeah, as part of the agreement, complete maintenance is theirs.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, that's why we're dropping it dramatically, because the
Correct.
Dodges will come out that don't need them.
Correct.
Okay.
The 2019 actual for that 49,000, to my understanding, is largely related to those older Dodge
It is, because
Chargers.
I've seen the bills for those Dodges, they're tremendous.
Yep.
Okay. And then the 105 that we have on the next page, that is for either lease or purchase then?
Correct.
Are we looking at, how many vehicles are we considering with the 105? Is that 3 vehicles?
Three purchase, potentially five, two, I'm sorry, two new
Two
purchase
purchases or
and
3
potentially
leases?
more if we lease.
Okay.
I thought it was three.
So it's 3 purchases?
Is it 3 per?
Yeah, yes, sir. Based on the cost from the previous years, it's roughly, with the equipment, it's roughly about 45,000. So that's just for the purchase of the vehicles. Then there's the other line for the equipment's on the vehicle, which was the upfitting
So if we,
aspect of it.
so if we do lease then, would we get more vehicles?
Potentially.
Potentially you would, sir, yes, sir.
We would, because I mean, those other old cars are killing us.
Yes, sir.
And then the question is, those vehicles that you get to completely, they have everything in them that you guys need?
Yes, sir. When we go through that process, we'll spec out the equipment that's to be installed on them and have it built to that fashion.
Does that include pretty much, for example, camera equipment? There should be locker storage in the back so you can secure evidence, guns, whatever, that sort of thing in those vehicles?
It could potentially include all that equipment.
So that'll just be presented whenever those.
Whenever we move forward
Okay.
in that direction, and it'll be part and parcel of the request.
Jim, did you have anything?
No, I'm good unless anybody has any questions.
I'm all right.
You okay for now?
Actually, I have a question,
Claire?
and Jim may not like me on this one. We've, since 2016, we've had a substantial increase in the legal costs.
Which page is that?
It would
I
be
saw that back.
page.
I saw that too, I don't remember.
No, you're actually doing me a favor.
Yeah, here we go.
I'm gonna bring it
It's
up.
31.
No, when you hear my answer.
I mean, you know.
Now,
for-
let me explain something first.
Sure.
This is a budget. These aren't monies budgeted for me. I've always objected to what they call it. It should say legal. Comes to like $96,000 I wish I was paid in the last 3 years. I get paid less than half that. It's probably 30 hours a month. John's what, 3,700 3,700 a month is gross billings. The rest get paid out of this budget for other things.
Yeah, and that's actually was my question. I know
Yeah.
you don't
No, so
take
I'm not
home,
offended.
I know you don't
Glad,
take home
'cause
the whole
everybody-
96,
Matter of fact,
but
I always see it on the Facebook today. Yeah, he makes 98,000. I wish they did
can
it,
we
you
get
know.
a summary of what this actually entails?
Yeah,
just so-
you could get that summary line by line, they could run it for you, but I know we have, just guessing, I don't do the, I'm not sure why they call it that and what they pay, but I know in this budget year, I think it was this budget year or last budget year, we always have certain amount of costs with our union lawyer. We actually, in that one issue concerning the police officer that made national news, I guess, we paid their lawyer. We paid certain arbitration expenses, so a lot of it went in those categories. Sometimes I think, I'm just guessing, no head of the finance department here, Sometimes when surveys are ordered for legal reasons, it comes out of that. And I think the other reason that it's that figure, regardless of what funds it's in, is in case you have a large lawsuit. There's a condemnation claim, a Burt Harris Act, something of specialty. We'd have to hire someone, so that's why it's highlighted.
And I know it
Okay.
comprises a lot, but it's a it's a sizable increase, but I'm just trying to see where
Oh,
where
is
those
there
funds.
an increase? I didn't even look. Why? Is there an increase?
Well, over the past 3 years, it's been a sizable increase from 40,000 to 96,000, so I'm trying to see what that.
Oh, that I can't tell you why.
Well, I
No
can,
idea.
you already addressed some of it. It was for other legal and attorney fees, not associated directly with you, but coming out of that legal department.
Maybe that's what it was paid out of. I have no idea.
Yeah,
Couldn't
and
help
I'm
you.
just trying to
I
see
have no
if
idea.
these are one-time fees that we're just assuming coming through, or is there obvious, or is this gonna be a reoccurring item?
It
From- in
depends,
perpetuity.
it depends entirely on what the situation is. The vast majority of those were probably one-time issues, but there may be continuing issues such as potential condemnation issues and some other.
Yeah, you could pull the actual line out of them somewhere and see what they were.
If you look at history, 3-year history, 2016 actual 40,000, 2017 actual 58,000, 2018 actual 82,000, budgeted in 90,000 in FY19, probably based on that year of 2018, and then we budgeted the same in 2020 at 90,000. Right now, we're at 35,000 change, so any legal-related costs hit that object code 319 in that account 514300. We can get you detail out of the general ledger about what some of those actual costs were maybe in 2018 where you did see a spike, but we have seen an increasing trend from the last 3 actual years from 40 to 58 to 82. And so that was why the conservative budget at 90 came out both in FY19 and remained at 20.
And I have one more item, just quick, on page 53, city events. I know we did want to move forward and try to do maybe a quarterly movie in the park thing. Is that where those funds would come from for that? Okay.
In fact, we're already discussing the next Christmas event.
But I would like to, we were gonna do that movie
Yeah.
in the park, and I think that's a really great idea.
Sure.
So, I'm glad we have it. And then we also discussed earlier today about a line item for future dredging purposes that we're gonna try to fit in the budget as well. I actually have a line item for that. I don't have any more.
One of the, I guess, questions that I wanted to ask you is, the city really doesn't own a whole lot of actual property that I can tell.
Correct.
Are there any of those types of acquisitions that we can see in the near future to where we need to create a budget item for that as well?
We haven't really discussed the issue of potential acquisitions for some time. But the last time we discussed an acquisition was in probably 2004, and that was a piece of property that was a trailer park at the time, 2003 maybe. But with respect to acquisition of additional property, we haven't moved in any specific direction for that. The city owns some vacant land, some of it's marshland. The only other parcel that we did own, we negotiated with the county, and by the way, for the people from Orange Grove, I spoke with the county engineers and Mr. Amadou, and their project on Orange Grove has been delayed because of all the rain, but they indicate to me that it should be underway in the next day or two, or at latest the first couple of days in August, and that was as of this morning when I spoke with them. But other than that, sir, we have not planned on the acquisition of any specific property.
And at some point, if there's a city need, then we would just open up the line item in the budget.
Yes, sir.
And so you don't foresee anything, at least within the next year, where we would need any type of,
No, and if we can, we would have some reserves. You certainly can make a move in that direction if it was absolutely essential.
if we had to.
Yes, sir.
The reason I was asking is because if we're talking about road expansion, I think there's some property right around there that's not owned by the city. Or does the city own all that?
No, sir, there's, if we're talking about Ritchie Drive, there,
Just for example.
Cramen, I believe the Cramens own that piece of property.
The one to the north fence?
Yes, sir.
Just to the north of what would be the new Ritchie Drive is a landlocked property. And if you were going to develop that road, I would presume you'd be knocking on their door to get contribution to build that road.
Correct.
We've already discussed this. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, that's a landlocked piece of parcel there. In other words, they're not landlocked really because there's a road, but we haven't built it yet, okay? So I would presume that that property becomes 3 and 4 times. Right now, it's worth very little. You put that road in, it's worth a lot. I presume they'd be joining in the expense. Mr. Lupo and I have discussed that.
And that's where I was getting at, is if we run into a project and we have to buy a small parcel of land, either for road construction or for drainage, I didn't see anywhere in the budget where that's been built in.
No, we haven't, because we really haven't anticipated any type of acquisition. And the kind of property that you're talking about would probably be incidental, small amounts of property that we can easily handle within the budget.
No, that answers my question. Thank you.
We're carrying a sizable increase in the liability insurance as well. Now, I understand healthcare is going up, workers' compensation liability. Is that just in conversations with our insurance carriers?
Yeah.
Because it's a 150% increase thereabouts over fiscal 2019?
I don't believe that's,
Not that much, but it's a
no,
lot.
it can't be.
I'm looking at 2019 budget 106, 2020 proposed 244.
They tell us 150,000 more, Johnson?
So,
They just called with the number, that's why some.
Okay.
so in years past, the way we've budgeted is we've broken out liability insurance between general fund and, water and sewer fund. Now we're putting that liability, that budgeted expenditure entirely in general fund and
Okay.
using that interfund allocation method that I talked about for all those
Okay, so you're carrying it in line item and then
Carrying it.
transferring it.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
easier for accounting purposes, so when we get the bill, we're not having to try to break out and calculate the split amongst the different funds. We can report it all in general fund and then use the monthly interfund allocation formula to charge the other fund.
So okay. So some of these are skewed as far as rate increases because of the
Right.
fund
If you're-
transfers.
If you're comparing the 2019 budget, yeah, you have to look at, okay, what was in Fund 400, water and sewer fund, for.
Across the
these.
board.
You'll see it as 0 and 20.
They gave us a word, correct me, Jocelyn, they gave us a worst-case scenario. They did this last year, knowing we have a budget to set.
Mhm.
We put a good portion of that, right? How much more did we put in there, Andy? 100,000 or something? 50?
For the health insurance?
Yeah, just the health
It
insurance.
was nearly 13,000 per person.
And how many
The-
employees?
The liability insurance wouldn't change. I think we had a 2-year rate lock, so there shouldn't be a significant
Yeah,
increase
so
there.
it's all health, right?
Yeah, the
How much more
increases
did we
are
put in for health?
45.
So liability itself is flat across the board?
Pretty
We-
much,
We
yeah.
signed a 2-year flat rate lock
Yeah,
contract.
we did that last year, right? Yeah, but we put 50,000 more in, and hopefully that'll be enough, just guess.
Yeah, there shouldn't be a large increase budgeted for liability insurance.
The other question that I had that was kind of directed at law enforcement as well as Mr. Lupo is a lot of the cost of our personnel costs are law enforcement. I know that there have been grants in the past where you can take an existing officer and train them to be, for example, a DRE, which is a drug recognition expert, a K-9 unit, whatever. And sometimes there's grants that'll cover their salaries for a portion of time to do that, as well as provide the education. Have we explored any grants where we can keep the personnel that we have, potentially reduce the cost in terms of salaries for the next budget year.
Some of the, excuse me, some of those grants that you refer to are just that. They allow you to obtain a person, a position, and to train that person in that position. But in order to get that grant, you must commit to pick up the total cost beyond a certain point. But beyond that issue, we have certainly looked at every potential avenue out there for grants. Unfortunately, for actual bodies, people, they are very slim. Where we have been successful is in equipment and in training and some other issues, but not. But the grants are quite difficult to obtain for a full position for a specific purpose.
And I was just asking because if the city were to find a grant here and there for that touch salaries, it could help us with some of what's cost. That's the
Yes,
only
sir.
reason I was asking.
Yes, sir, we continue to look.
On administrative expenditures, we have salary increases from 100 to 137,000 fiscal year. Can we go into the detail on that a little bit?
Can you tell me what page you're on?
Oh, I'm sorry, 27 on the latest one. Top line, salary, regular salaries, wages.
That had to do, Jocelyn, that had to do with Valerie? Andrew?
Don't believe there's any increase in no additional personnel. I'll have to, I can break it out by individual and show what the salaries being paid in 19 and salaries being paid in 20.
Yeah,
There's only-
because it's
There's
a
been no-
30% increase, so I'm just trying to see.
No, there has been no increase. There's no increase in salaries.
Is he talking about
Well, not,
here?
part of that could be, yeah, part of that.
Oh, he's not.
Could percentage-wise, because it's aligned with retirement contributions, it kind of goes right down the column.
Sure, I have my detailed personnel up. I can
Okay.
look at it right now.
But the only increase we're talking about essentially is the, over the 2-year period of 5%. And in future, all increases will be based on a merit increase procedure that we've talked about for the last year. And on a quarterly basis, each employee will be, have a review conducted, and at the end, a determination will be made within a sliding scale, but not in this budget year. It's in the following budget year, but we'll come to council with that. This increase that we're talking about is solely a one-time 5% cost of living for 2 years, over the past budget and this budget.
Yeah, so 2.5% this year and then a 2.5% catch-up.
Yep, correct.
One of the things that you contemplated, I'm sure, is that we've lost employees that have been valuable to the city based on not competing salaries with other jurisdictions.
Correct. I need not tell you the difficulty in obtaining qualified individuals to come to the city. It's been exasperating. We've tried every different resource out there, different mechanisms to obtain employees for several different positions. But our remuneration to our employees has traditionally been less than exciting, and provides us a task with respect to recruitment. The past year's upheaval with respect to politics and the continued exaggerations by some political entities with respect to the dissolving of the city and the other nonsense that they bring forward has made it even more difficult, and it has exacerbated some of the feelings of employees about and the pride that they have in our community. So we're trying to amend that as we go, but we are certainly doing active recruiting given the limitations of our budget process.
And one of the things I wanted to ask is, what positions have been open that aren't filled, or do we have an outline of?
There are basically 3 positions that have not, that we're in the process of filling. We outlined in the budget earlier to you, fiscal, public works director, fire, and that's about where we're at this point in time as far as new positions are concerned.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I heard those 2, but I didn't know if there were others out there.
We're going to consider some others and I bring them to council, that's for sure.
Okay.
Are they anticipated within this budget, or is that future?
Future.
So to answer your question, it's possible we had the city clerk maybe previously divided between utility billing.
Correct.
And administrative, and for the FY20 budget, that's Salicari would be is 100% to administrative.
And that's the difference.
So it's no longer under utility?
He'll be coming out from under utilities, correct.
And assuming he was doing work, what about the scope gap within utilities? Is that covered? We're pulling his funding out of utilities, so he's 100% in the general fund now as a city clerk.
Well, don't be sure you don't mix up fund and department. So one was the utility department and then the administrative department.
Okay.
Within administrative department, there is still an allocation of time, 50% to general fund, 25% to CRA, and 25% to utility for the administrative efforts of those 3 individuals. City manager, assistant city manager, or 4 individuals, city clerk and administrative assistant to the city manager. So the department's only 4 individuals split amongst those 3 funds, but those 4 salaries and benefits reside in administrative department.
But that's what we were talking about, potentially restructuring?
Correct.
Any other questions, comments? What I'd like to do, go ahead.
I don't know, this might not be the place to have this discussion, but like you brought up the point how it's hard to get people to come here and, you know, recruit people to work here for our city and even the morale of the city. I don't know if it's anywhere in our budget to have a campaign of some kind, a public, I don't know, commercial or something, letting people know that we're not going anywhere. And, you know, what our intention is as a city to stay here and to build and to continue doing what we're doing. You know, just something to put a kibosh to the rumors, per se, and let people know what we're up to. I mean, I think that that might be something that could be, you know, something possibly to throw out there. Because I know there is lots of rumors and people, you know, aren't going to, you know, be interested in coming, or even the morale of people that are serving in our police department, in our fire department, you know, everyone's wondering what's going on. You know, I think that it would take something possibly publicly said, or I don't know if that's even proper to do, to put to rest some of these things. Because I know our residents want to be here and want us to be a city.
Councilwoman, we're attempting to address that issue on several different levels. We have small gatherings of all the employees in this room where we discuss these issues, where we attempt to assure our employees that they are, in fact, their work effort is appreciated by both council and by the general public, and that past history dictates that this city will be here for beyond any of us, despite the efforts in past years and some of the extraneous comments from other politicians outside of this community. This city will endure, will progress, and this budget proves that. And we will, are addressing that in a different format with our publications that we're putting out. And then some of the activities suggested by some of the other council people on a more regular basis to show that we're here, we're active. And also the work that we do with respect to our parks and our roadways and recent developments with respect to our dredging will prove that we're here and we intend to stay. And we'll certainly consider your thoughts because they are near and dear to our hearts.
And I was gonna comment as well that I think as the general public in our community see the progress, I mean, they hear us talk, but as they see Washington Street, for example, being completed, as they see Orange Grove, there's a lot of projects that go on every day. I think a lot of people don't really realize within the city. But I think there's more of an awareness now. So as I think the general public see that we progress and we do a lot of smaller projects and a couple bigger projects to improve the community every year as we make that progression, I think that I think it'll help resolve some of those issues.
I hope so.
I do have one additional question. In the police department line item, you have an expense for boat maintenance, our lovely little boat. Is there a plan for that, or is that just an allotment of funds, or is there some strategy behind that to make that more serviceable? I know there's a lot of complaints concerning it, so.
Yes, we look at other options out there for potentially replacing in the future, but we don't have a specific plan at this time to replace that.
Okay.
So we maintain it as best as possible and keep it is fully functional and operational as we sit here.
If I might, once we get our hands around our vehicles, which are the primary tools that we have for the police department as far as mobility, our very next target with respect to the police department will be to upgrade our marine facilities, our marine operations, which is so critical to this community. But we've had to be able to take the most pressing issue for us at this time, which is the daily beat patrol vehicle. So yes, you're correct, sir. We want to move forward, and it'll probably be in the following budget year.
Now, actually going back to the question regarding the vehicles, assuming we have at least 5x3, is that essentially end the vehicle upgrade, the beat vehicle upgrade cycle, or is there still plans beyond that?
Depending upon the number that we acquire, 3 purchase or 5 lease, that should pretty much put us in a position of complete mobility. There will be, what, 1 or 2 left that will rotate out in the following year, Mike?
Yes. The plan behind it, I think that gets us into a good position and out of a status of being backwards in them, gets us almost to an even keel so that we can then move forward and continue with a rotation so that we don't get back into that same problem of having 15-year-old vehicles, exaggerated. So once we get there, if each year on a minimal basis you are able to then rotate out 2 new cars or something of that nature, this way you only having to look at that smaller number for each year rather than a large scale project to get a lot more vehicles and get it back into that cycle.
Now remember, most recently we've acquired approximately 6 vehicles in rotation. The 2 Humvees, the 2 from Brooksville, the 2 prior purchases, and the 2 that we have now. Of course, the Humvees are side, not fully active. when I say fully active, fully utilized on a daily basis. So we're slowly but surely removing the anchor around our necks, the old Dodges, and moving forward with the newer purchases. So we'll eventually come to a modern fleet where we'll be dropping off one or two at the end each year,
And
but we'll
rotating.
always have a modern fleet rolling out there.
One of the questions that I had since you brought up the boat issue is I saw that there was a sizable boat that's in our property right behind here. And I didn't know if those aren't in service, if we're gonna liquidate them or what the deal is with some of the stuff that seems to be sitting back there that's not being used.
Yeah, the vessel that's in the back is not in service. It's my understanding that the engine is not even in it any longer, and it's able to go. We just have to make sure that the procedure for getting rid of it is acceptable. That particular vessel was originally a federal surplus that was picked up by Lake County, and then Lake County was getting rid of it, and we obtained it from them 2005, 2007-ish. So we just got to make sure that we have the authority to surplus it versus send it back to federal surplus.
We're attempting to surplus it, it's taken us a while to get the federal authorization to do so.
Okay, I understand. I was just curious because
I remember when we got it. It was to make sure you get something given to you that came via grant, you can't just go along.
understand.
Sorry, one more thing and then
No, I
I'll
was
stop,
gonna
I
ask you.
promise. We have a capital expenditure for the fire department for equipment of $67,000. Can we go into that detail?
Sure. So this year, we are requesting the purchase of extrication equipment, modern extrication equipment, for us to be used. Currently, we run on a two-man apparatus. Our power unit and stuff, will do the job. It's just very time-consuming to have roughly a 70-pound pack that we have to carry to the car with the hoses and the rest of that, to where we will now have battery-operated tools, to where we can literally, if you've seen Pasco County Fire Rescue's recent thing on ABC Action News, they literally get off the truck and within 15 seconds have a tool to the car, extricating the person from the car. So that's the bulk of that. It's about $40,000 to purchase those rescue tools with service and all that other stuff. The remaining of that is just equipment for a vehicle that we're going to be looking to get from the federal government to help us with stormwater responses and brush fire responses.
At this type of workshop, do we open it to the general public call for any comments?
Sir?
We open this discussion to the general public call. I saw some people signed up.
You can do whatever you like. I mean, we set whatever rules you like. You don't need to explain what you need to do before you finish this meeting. Okay, but if you want to open up for comment, fine, have your question answered, that's fine.
Okay. And
That's up to you, up to council.
what I was looking at is there was someone that signed up that wanted at least a comment on our discussion up here from the general public. And I saw Mr. Mueller had signed up, and if the council will allow, I'd like him just an opportunity for a moment to speak, to see if he had any additional comments based on our discussion in the budget.
Dave Mueller, 5439 Blue Point Drive. This was my list, but you guys did an excellent job knocking down a lot of them. I do have a couple questions. There was an item, of course, here it is. Back in the utility fund, page 20 of the previous published amount, the sale of water in the actuals was $241K, and it didn't look like it was tracking to where the actuals or you're budgeting for this year. Is there a reason why that was so low, yet we're budgeting almost $2 million for the sale of water?
And what I was gonna ask you to do is, if you wanna touch on all the points that you wanna make in a couple minutes.
Yeah, we can, and then we can do it that way, that's fine.
Correct. Because I'd rather you address council, and then we'll answer
that
what we
way
feel we can.
It flows
answer.
better, that works for me too. All right, that would be one of them, page 20, line item, sale of water for $241K. Next. The storm fees right now only apply to the water bill. It doesn't apply to irrigation. It's $3 per bill. Might consider that as an opportunity to pick up additional revenue there and add a storm fee to the irrigation, because that's the piece that's actually getting in the yard, rolling down the hill, right? Also consider looking at adjusting the rates. I believe Mr. Lupo adjusted that, addressed that. Thank you very much. Possibly even adjusting the storm fee to $4 or $5 per. And the flow assumption that you rebalanced a lot of that, that made a lot of sense, and those variances, yeah, you just can't do like to like if you're comparing that. The $667,000 contract that was signed, or was it signed? And that's moving forward. We have $300,000 in the budget for future dredging, and then there's potential drainage. I asked you guys to consider some of the drainage issues, along with trying to get some of that stuff addressed. The drive home policy on police cars, I don't know what that is or if there is one. And then Washington Street, there was some favorability with the negotiation that was done that potentially freed up some monies for other things. I believe it was CRA when we discussed. Could that be used in maybe some of the potholes on Treadway?
Thank you. I wanted to address a couple of those, if I may. The
Want me to
drive
sit?
home policy in
Gonna
terms
sit
of the
down?
police vehicles,
Gonna stand or sit?
that's up to you.
In case you need to address it, okay.
No,
No, that's
since you're at the podium, and I don't think anyone else has signed up, if you'd like, I just wanted to address a couple things. The drive home cars with the police department is something that I was concerned with, because obviously if we lease vehicles and we can lease them with unrestricted mileage, we can do what's called hot seat them, which is I think the term when they rotate them between shifts. But there is a within their union allows them the right to take those vehicles home, and that's something that the council nor the city can disturb, because that's part of their police union. So that's not really an option for us, as I think some of us have already discussed it and explored it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and also as additional issues with respect to that, is that vehicles must be fully cleaned and inspected if you're going to use one vehicle and another officer is going to take it to ensure that there's no other items. There's a whole list of issues. And the policy that we have had in this city has been for several years now is to allow our police officers to take the vehicles.
And as it relates to the stormwater comment that you made, as well as in terms of the drainage, that was one of the things I was addressing with Mr. Lupo, that if we restructure some of these fees, what I'd like to see happen is increase some of those, because we are low, and then hopefully utilize that money for some of the salaries if we can shift things around, which would free up some money in the general fund. But that's going to be something I think that the city administration, Mr. Lupo and Ms. Martinez or Dr. Martinez would have to put together and bring back to council. So that's what I was asking him earlier, that when you suggested that was what I was talking about. And I didn't know if you wanted to follow up with anything. Okay, so those were some of the comments that I had about your dissertation. Council have anything else? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Okay.
Do we want to address the sale of water issue for the 241,000 that looked
Yes.
abnormal to him? So I can address that, and I can go as much or as little detail as you like, but I'll give you the high-level explanation. Simply that there was a posting error in December where the transactions were posted within the utility billing module within the city's ERP, but those transactions did not get posting back to the accounting module, which is where those numbers are derived from. So it's really just it's a posting error. It has nothing to do with actual collections. So that will write itself out, and we're working through that, but it's just an accounting issue essentially.
So do we know what the actuals are incurred year-to-date? Are they sitting somewhere else?
That's a computer
They've been
generated.
posted somewhere else?
It's the interface between our Black Mountain and,
In the subsequent version, there was a more accurate depiction. Again, we have to go through the history, but there was a negative accounts receivable balance, which didn't make any sense. So bringing that accounts receivable balance to a positive amount, I estimated more or less what the revenue should be, and that's in that revised version that was passed out today. But again, we're gonna go through each month and reconcile and get to the exact amount that's been billed and collected.
So there's a journal entry needs to be posted to reverse that and post here?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then I wanted Jim to address a couple things as well, because there's some legal issues with some things that you had mentioned. So if you,
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, just so you know what you're doing here, before I comment on a couple of things that was said, there's a workshop. You don't need to vote here, nor can you vote on something, but what you need to get a consensus is that, are you fine with this proposed budget, or do you want to have another workshop? I think we tentatively scheduled one for next week. If everybody, you could talk about it. Look, I'm good with this. Bring this back to the first budget meeting. Okay, when you come to the first budget meeting, it's a one-way trip pretty much. Okay, so we have to set those dates. We have certain parameters in which the city must set the dates. We were discussing them today. We had to wait until the county. They can't be on the same date that the county or other municipalities are doing it, so we're jockeying those dates in. So your decision today, not that you need to take a vote on it, but you could say, does anybody want another budget workshop on this? That's what you're deciding today. That's why you're here, okay? So before you leave, you gotta decide that, okay? And number two, just in some legal things that I think the stormwater issue, I think there's been some comments, increase the stormwater or whatever. So just so you understand, we don't set you budgeting for how much you're gonna get from stormwater, but you're not setting the rate of stormwater here. You're setting the ad valorem rate is the only thing you're doing here, and budgeting where your money's going to. We also have the CRA that will be peeled out for a special budget on the CRA. We have to talk about that for this. And so I guess what I'm saying is, 2 months from now, if the city, I say this for purposes of explanation, you want to increase the stormwater fee, okay, to raise X amount of dollars. It's not a lot, but increase to $1 would be probably 50,000. But if you decide to do that, you can do that. I mean, that's done by ordinance, okay? And if you did do that, then we would start to collect money. And if it's a large amount of money, we can always amend the budget during the year. So if you had you did something that brought you to $1 million, we can at any time amend this budget during the year. So it's not like you're doing that now.
okay.
Okay. So, but if you wanted to plan for it, you could do that, but that's kind of a different issue. And the same thing applies to taking home cars, okay? First of all, the issue of take-home cars is nothing, it's a union issue that we contracted with, okay? You can contract with them. Right now, we have a union contract that they can take home cars, okay? There'll be an executive session at 6:30 before the next regularly scheduled council meeting, which would be the first time, I think, for you two, right? And to go over the negotiation of the union contract. We're kind of doing this early this year, so we can see what you want to do with those, but that's a union contract issue, okay? So in other words, what's in here in terms of salaries and things like that doesn't mean you're paying anybody any more money, and it surely doesn't mean that there's going to be some merit increases. We have unions, okay? That hasn't happened this year and ain't happening next year. We got to decide that, okay? And we'll be chatting about that at the executive session, okay? And I'll explain it further. So that decision's not being made. Because you put something in here in terms of additional salaries doesn't mean you're doing it, okay? You just budgeted for it. Now they're watching that, and so when I try to negotiate with them, it might make it a little more difficult, but that's my job. And I'm glad to see it sitting there. So there's things like that. So the only thing you're doing is setting a millage rate, okay? And this is what you plan to bring in, and it balances out what you plan to spend. Nothing more, nothing less. You can amend the budget at any time. So in other words, you don't do it intentionally, but, you know, at 300,000, that's in contingencies. Now, that's not in the city budget, technically that's in the CRA. We follow the same rules, but we're not bound by law to follow those same rules. But it's contingency now for the reasons I was explaining a few minutes ago. But once you're comfortable, you get into 666, you could say, well, let's spend the money on this, okay? So you can do all those kind of things. Now, you can't create more money. So this is the proposed budget for what pretty sure is going to come in, and it generally does, okay? We're very close, and what you're thinking, you're gonna spend that, and you set the millage rate based on it. So if you think this is good enough for you, this is gonna come in formal form at a date. If you want to have more conversation about it, you need to set another budget workshop. That's what you're doing.
Well, the only thing I'd say is I would like to see the line item for the future dredging added in there. And one small item also brought up was getting council at least off of CRA, small amount, $500 or something like that. And other than that,
We could do that very easily.
that's what I'm saying. So other than that, I'm quite happy with the overall budget.
What was the first thing?
Adding a line item for future dredging. We
The
start,
number?
yeah, start putting something aside for,
In the CRA?
well, does that work?
Well, I guess the point is, that's a different budget than this, although they're
Well,
both
couldn't it
looked
be
at
in
it.
the general fund as well?
But you could, that's why I'm asking, so.
Yeah, because we have more flexibility in a general fund than we do in the other fund, I'm assuming, so,
We could easily add that line.
okay.
What kind of number,
Well,
If it's $500,000, I think you need another meeting. I don't know if it's $2, you
I
understand?
leave that up to Vince. Just that we have it for future, I mean, we'd start putting.
It's a
towards it
serious question.
on a
We have
regular
to
development.
have the answer tonight. You want to have another meeting or not?
Well, I was gonna comment on
I
that.
mean, the other council members might think he's talking 500,000. I have a sliced idea. How much?
Yeah.
You want to leave it to him?
Well, yeah,
If I
that's
could-
where, I mean, if we are going to start attributing future funds for dredging, then I definitely think we should have more conversations
About
on
how
that,
much you wanna
because,
Put in per year.
yeah, I mean, well, and if we even want to, because now we're telling our citizens that we are going to be spending money as a city on dredging canals. And that's actually a policy change at the, a policy initiative at this point, which I don't know if we want to go with. Now, you know, if it's $20,000 for exploration, that's one thing. If it's 100,000 or 200,000.
We already have dredging contingency money in the budget, so maybe we don't need to put it in a line item.
Really don't.
Well, it's
That's
dredging.
not what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I mean, you got plenty of latitude in
It's in,
CRA.
well, I saw
but-
that, it's in there, and it's in
Yeah.
the contingency for almost $300,000.
Well,
You-
again,
that's-
that's contingency based on not getting all of the funds from the Restore Act.
It's emergency.
I mean, it's a CYA for the budget in case, for some reason, the federal government says, well, we're only gonna pay you 50 cents on the dollar because you didn't
Right.
dot this line or cross this T. That's different than a policy change of going in and saying, yes, as a city, we are going to start dredging canals, one way or the other, in the budget. And I'm not sure if we, as a city or as a council right now, want to say that and put those funds in the budget and saying, yes, we are doing this.
That's fair, I mean, we do have the contingency, so I'm probably, that's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Just my comment and my thought on this is I'm one of those people that I like to chew on things. This is a newer position for me. And one of the other things that may happen is you may have a lot of people that, in the community that watch this and have certain comments or input. And for that reason, I think that we should set it, even if it's just for a real short workshop.
And I would
one more time.
actually, well, not that he's proposing it, but I would second it. Let's all chew on this, because this is a major
Sure.
endeavor for this city. Obviously, we do it every year, but we are setting the budget. I know there's probably people watching right now, probably throwing popcorn at the screen. Give them an opportunity to reach out to us and talk to us.
But I think that this panel, in a lot of ways, is newer together, so I think having an additional meeting to kind of absorb
Polish
all
off
this.
the edges.
Yes, that would be my thought on this.
That's fine.
Works for me.
Yeah, we can schedule that.
It's already
No,
scheduled.
no,
Same time,
it is,
same
it's
place,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Next week?
Next
And I
week.
would anticipate a very short meeting
I
next
don't
time.
say stuff.
That
I wanna
just-
jinx us.
That
I'm
just
just kidding.
took care of that.
And what time would the meeting be exactly?
Well, it says 7:30 on your notice, but it's really 6:30.
For you, it's
That is
7:30.
not your fault.
Really 6:30.
And at this time, were there any motions?
Motion to adjourn? There you go.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, council.
Thank you.
That's good.